water sample. People are like, should I come to the board meeting? Like, oh no, there's nothing on the agenda. Oh, absolutely not.
Did you hear what's at 2:15?
Yes, I would not have been happy if I had those tickets.
Back to school night, like, oh, hi, Ellen Marie's now. Oh my gosh. For you.
I was talking about the public facing. Like public facing, they're totally different.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our meeting tonight. Thank you for coming. Before we start, I would like to mention the board convened an executive session to consider matters regarding the appointment or employment of a particular person or persons and proposed pending or current litigation. With that, I will call the meeting to order and ask folks to please rise and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we will start by asking for a motion on approval of the minutes from August 25th. Is there a motion? Thank you. And a second? Thank you, Rich. Comments or notes on those minutes? Betty, great job as always. Thank you. And I will ask for the vote. All in favor? Aye, thank you. And we'll move on to the report of our superintendent, Dr. Christopher Zublionis.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's here this evening. Great to see you. We had a very exciting start to the 2022-23 school year this past week. And in the days leading up to our Superintendent's Conference Day, Mr. Pappas and I worked with Mr. John Hall and our construction managers to ensure that projects were moving forward, and that while construction is continuing on some rooms, we have reached a substantial completion point, which is great news, and that allowed us to open our buildings. In addition, we conducted bulk air and water testing that provided us with the additional security to know that it was safe to return. However, we will continue that testing as we progress through the next few weeks to ensure that remains the case. Construction will take place after school and on the weekends. I have received several questions from parents about that, but that's absolutely the case, that we will not be doing any construction while students are in our buildings. Our Superintendent's Conference Day on August 31st was an energizing start to the year, which started with our very own B-Day Band, an ensemble of high school and middle school music educators and faculty from other departments who performed the song Under Pressure. I was able to join them for a little bit of that, for a few bars, and we were able to surprise the faculty. So it was really great for our first in-person conference day since 2019. Believe it or not, it was such an amazing start, and we had some great conversations after that about the symbolism of the song as it being an appropriate soundtrack for the last 3 years. And we talked about the focus for the next 3 years as finding that balance between structure and creativity, which we've always seen as something we could balance at North Shore, that they're not opposites. We spoke about what makes us us as we return to a more normal year, and how perhaps this can be the title of the movie about the next 3 years, a story of clarity on, commitment to, and camaraderie around, consistency with what we are calling our North Shore journey, which we'll continue to talk about publicly, get feedback on, and present to our Board of Education on. Focused academic growth and structures for students, building independent expert learners, connecting learning to the real world and making it authentic and meaningful, building positive relationships, developing students with voice who drive their own conversations, building students who are empowered with resilience to make healthy decisions, and allowing students to pursue their own interests through electives and extracurricular activities. So we look forward to that important work this year. And we had a terrific opening week for our students. Today was the 5th day of school, and they are already fully integrated back into their normal routines and extracurricular activities. Our students seem genuinely very happy to be back, as do our faculty. And we had the pleasure, some of us, of being at our first women's volleyball game, varsity game on Tuesday, and we opened the new gym floor. We actually have two new gym floors, the main gym and the auxiliary gym, both new floors, painted, decked out. They look amazing. And we had a little ribbon cutting ceremony before the game, and it was really terrific. So I want to thank our athletics department, Margie Anderson and Don Lang, for creating that opportunity. And for those who were able to attend, thank you for being there. It was on very short notice. We have a lot of great games coming up tomorrow and Saturday. Please make sure to check the athletics website and the schedule. Tomorrow we have JV girls tennis, JV football, JV cross country, boys and girls, JV volleyball and varsity volleyball, and JV soccer. On Saturday, we have another action-packed day, JV girls soccer, JV boys soccer, varsity football here at 2 o'clock, and varsity boys soccer at Manhasset at 2 o'clock. We've had our back to school night start. We had our middle school back to school night last night. It was really an amazing experience with the new addition. We had students playing music as you walked in, and it was a very North Shore moment. It was an excellent, very positive event, and kind of like connected with how our teachers and our students were feeling. Great to see our families. We have our next back to school night next Thursday at 7 o'clock for our elementary schools, and high school on the 29th at 7. Our first Coffee with Chris will take place on Tuesday, this Tuesday, the 13th at 9:30, and we'll talk about our work for this year ahead, as well as the impact on losing our biggest taxpayer, LIPA, and why we proactively lowered our tax levy in response and are going forward to balance the interests of our students and our residents together. Earlier today, we sent an email about Parent University. We have, under the direction of Dr. Smythe, we have a great new Parent University program, which will begin next Wednesday at 7:45 in the middle school library. And the first Parent University will be on the topic of dual enrollment, which, as you know, Dr. Dolan did a great job promoting and recreating last year. And so this is mostly for our parents of juniors and seniors, but of course, anybody is welcome. And we're excited for that. Dr. Titone will be the presenter. And then also, lastly, we have our Viking community committees. We've worked this year to reorganize our teaching and learning, equity, STEAM, and social emotional learning committees into one committee that works on specific topics. And we're going to have a series of meetings where we really form working groups and all work together on specific tasks like an MTSS plan, the North Shore Summer Experience, implementing a community fair celebrating the diversity within our community, and identifying and applying for grants. So we're going to really come together, all constituents, students, teachers, all of our staff, administrators, and parents to work on these goals. And the first meeting is on September 21st at 7 p.m. I know that was a long update. Thank you very much.
This was a terrific update, and I wanted to comment on so many things. I will only comment on one, which is that it took me up until maybe this past weekend to get Under Pressure out of my head after that performance. So now it's back in, but it was tremendous. I didn't realize you sang, Chris. Now everyone knows that you do. So you'll get called for weddings, bar mitzvahs. You have a whole sideline.
Nights and weekends.
Working out, exactly. Everyone knows where to reach you too. We'll now move on to our regular business and have a discussion of our district goals. What I'd like to do is first, just very briefly for the public, go through what we had summarized from our last discussion very briefly, and then I'll ask trustees to try to winnow the conversation down. So first we'll start with very large type comments, theoretical, bigger in scope, and then we'll move more towards things like, even smaller things like punctuation or moving a word here or there to make sure we get the gist right, because this will serve as the impetus of what we hope to accomplish, in addition to all the things we always accomplish every year, to move ourselves forward, because as everyone here knows, and certainly everyone in this dais knows, we are very heavily vested in continuous improvement in this district. We don't sit in our laurels. We don't just say, well, it worked last year, back to normal, let's just go through and bring out the old template, like when I was in school and they had those overhead projectors and they just put them on the screen every year, same way. We try to make it better every year. So the district goals that are currently presented to us in draft form, goal 1 is one of community outreach with a focus on community engagement. Goal 2 is a focus on the critical analysis of our instructional program. And goal 3 would be the strategic budget and financial planning. So with that, I will turn it over to my trustees. We don't need anything too formal, but just generally, if you have bigger in scope type comments, let's start there and let's do it.
I'll start really big scope, which I think we have a lot of goals, and I'm concerned about that. So I would like to see it a little bit narrower, particularly because when we're looking at the critical analysis of the instructional program, we have a strategic plan, right? But the second bullet, analyze all K through 12 curriculum progressions and course offerings. We're basically looking at everything. So I'm a little concerned, if we're going to do that, how are we going to do everything else? So that's sort of my thought. And, we have a chart. We've been reviewing continually instructional programs each year. So if we reviewed something last year or the year before, does it make sense to take a second look at it? So my sort of big point is, we don't need to do all of this year. So if we're going to analyze all K through 12 curriculum progressions, maybe then that's something that we do over 2 years. So I just want to be careful that we don't box ourselves in, even though I have complete trust in our administrators.
Just going on what Andrea said, I think we had wanted to look at this year world languages. So maybe looking at the K through 12 world languages, that would be a place to start. And I think Trustee Galati was wanted to have some analysis of athletics in the K to 12 and the integration. And we also talked about fine and performing arts as well. So maybe we could, we've looked at math and science recently, but we haven't looked at world languages in a very long time, not since we made some changes. So I would say, and we haven't looked at fine and performing arts as a whole in a long time. I not since I'm on the board, actually. We've never.
2013, 2014, we looked at FLES, K through 5. Performing arts has not been.
That's what I said. We haven't talked about the FLES, the languages since the FLES was put in. That would have been the year 2013, 2014. We haven't looked at fine and performing arts since I'm on the board. We looked at athletics. We had an athletic review, I want to say, about
2019.
Yeah. Well, no, not really. We had the last in-depth athletic review that we had was earlier than that. Must have been about 7 years ago.
So in 2019, 2020, we looked at phys ed, health, and athletics. In 2015, we looked at just athletics.
Right, the athletic review was in 2015. That was my point. So I think we should be looking at things we haven't looked at in a very long time. And if we haven't looked at world languages since 2013, 2014, I think it's time to put that on the calendar. I think if we've never done an analysis of the fine and performing arts program, it's time to put that on our calendar. And, if we want to do athletics as well, but I think it's a lot. But we can sort of order them, because I think we've looked at other aspects, math. We had a special ed review a while back, but that would also be something that should be agendaed, maybe not for this year, but for upcoming years, because it's been a long time since we had a review of special ed. So I think you can compartmentalize these and think about what the board thinks should be a priority for this year, because I think, Andrea's right. I don't think you can look at everything, right?
I think we should stay on this topic and hear other trustee thoughts on this question. Can I ask a clarifying point, though? Typically, what we have done traditionally, and both Marianne and Andrea referenced the history on this, is that we take, in my understanding and my experience on this board, we take two areas and we typically do an internal review and an external review. My sense of this goal from what we came out of it and from reading this was a little different, that it wasn't specifically a super in-depth review of any of these areas, but it was about the course progression and about the offerings to try to understand how they're working best for our students, but also with an eye towards the efficiencies that we're going to have to be finding. And so my concern is that if we don't take a whole view of all of those potential efficiencies, then we may end up over focusing on one area that may not be the right area for finding efficiencies, because that's the one that we put in our sights that year. So I guess I was curious, Chris, how you and your team saw it. Was it about the progression and about that aspect, or was it I mean, I actually don't think you're proposing a deep dive into all the departments.
I think that is a good distinction. We really wanted to do almost like an audit overview analysis of everything we offer, how courses line up. So it wouldn't be like a program review like we did with literacy, where we had an external reviewer look at that in 2019. Just really doing a full inventory of everything we offer and asking questions like, are there redundancies, or does the course sequence in science from, K through 8, does that make sense? All of those questions, and really working with the directors and the building leadership to really take a fresh look at all of that to see where we might have redundancies and where we might have missed opportunities. We've talked about, media and communications and financial literacy. There's some opportunities that, even though we are thinking about efficiencies, if there are redundancies, there might be opportunities that we could find also as well. So it is more high level and more of an audit of everything, and then maybe some changes. But I also think, and we started thinking about this last year when we started talking about efficiencies, where you used to think as a director, you would think, okay, I'm looking at efficiencies within my own department. I remember having a conversation about it with a director about, we're trying to offer this business course, but the fact that we offer one less Spanish section in the middle school actually allows us to have that business course. So I think we're starting to think holistically about staffing and resources, and so that was the spirit of that. Yeah.
I can go. And so I love what you just said, and I think that makes sense. And if we choose to do this, I think then we have to look at the other bullet points. So as much as I like the transition idea, I'm worried it's just going to be too cumbersome to do all of this. And I'd rather have less goals and do them really well than overdo it. So I'm done. Everybody else can talk.
But I do think that's fine, and I understand that, and I understood that from this bullet, and I understood that from our meeting the last time. But I do think we need to do a review. If you want to do that, that's fine. But I also think, in addition to that, we should pick at least one of these areas to do an in-depth review on. At least one, maybe two, right? Because I do think we haven't looked at world languages in a long time. We should be looking at, fine and performing arts. That program has grown, it's morphed, it's changed. It has new demands for space. So I think we should be picking a couple of areas of concentration. Just because we're doing bullet 2 on number 2 doesn't mean we can't do something else as well.
I had seen Lisa. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead. Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
So, in listening to this conversation, well, first of all, I wanted to say that I thought the district goals really captured our conversation very well. I think that all of the major points that we wanted were really in here, so I appreciate that. I think that the holistic, especially with LIPA with this year, is more important. So my opinion would be that the audit overview analysis should be done this year, and maybe we look at the world languages next year, or maybe because we can't do everything, obviously. And I think that looking at everything, looking at the course offerings, it should be our priority, and maybe we drill it down next year to something more specific. And I personally do like the transitions. I think that that journey from elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school is very important. And even, way back when we did the homework study and we saw that crazy jump in homework in 6th grade, I think that I would, again, personally, I would rather see the holistic overview and the transitions than a more specific programmatic evaluation.
Trustee Cashman?
I think some great points were made, and I don't disagree with anything that was said. When I look at, obviously I missed the discussion last week, so I love reading this. When I look at this, when it's counted 1, 2, and 3, I almost think it's a nomenclature mistake, in that there's things here that are equally as important. In particular, I think goal 3, the third point, explore budgetary efficiency in a way that preserves the educational program of North Shore, but also addresses financial needs, to me is sort of the meat of a lot of what's going on in our whole district. So, and you know, the critical analysis of the instructional program is important, but to do a deep dive when this is the first year that the middle school even feels normal in 3 years feels maybe premature, right? Like we need to kind of invest in the rigor and getting kids back to normal. And, you know, we have 8th graders who are having their first real middle school experience, and they're going to high school next year. So I don't disagree that programs like FLES that haven't been investigated, if there are efficiencies to be had there need to be found. But if we do an analysis in the way that what Chris just described, hopefully that will be part of that whole conversation, and that those will make themselves, those ideas will come, you know. I guess that's all I want to say.
You know, based upon what Chris said, it makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons, because part of what we would do here in taking a general overview is not just look at individual disciplines, but really look at the interaction between disciplines, which is something that's equally important, because there is a lot of overlap that we don't necessarily take advantage of. So I think that's an important thing to look at. So yes, in terms of this particular goal, I would say that would be the main focus. In terms of what Marianne said about looking specifically at, you know, foreign language, fine and performing arts, I think that's really a judgment call that our administrators would have to make, because if you think it's too burdensome, then, you know, I certainly would go along with what you said. But if you think that it's something that's reasonable, I think it is pretty long overdue. And if it's a reasonable task in your view, I think it's something that should be considered.
Thank you, Rich. The interdisciplinary part is really resonated with me, but also what folks had said about the fact that these goals are not in silos. I think Lisa, you're both Lisa all year, Lisa C all year. And so, but I think it was Lisa Cola who talked about these goals do overlap. So we're talking about the transitions. It was Cashman, okay. So you talk about the transitions, but I think the North Shore journey, we as trustees do get a lot of backup information. And Dr. Smythe is probably not the only time that I throw a little praise your way, because the eloquent way that you wrote up the North Shore journey, to me, has been one of the reasons that I ran for this board, is that people don't, you're not a Glenwood Landing kid, you're not a high schooler, you're a North Shore student, K through 12. And the path that we put these young students on has to be thought of from the beginning all the way through to the end. And I think that is a perfect mesh. You talked a lot about it, and you wrote a lot about it, but I think it's a perfect mesh with the idea of this overview of the course progressions. Obviously, to some degree they're later when you talk about how the math progressions work at the high school, but even how we approach math from the beginning, and thinking about, you know, certainly Dr. Barhan or Banhar, close, and Singapore math that former Assistant Superintendent Klebicki used to have in this very auditorium. I remember learning math in a different way, sitting there and watching this, and being blown away, and even being more blown away by thinking, "Wow, I'm not sure about this." And then my kids just sort of drawing blocks and squares and counting things, and all of a sudden they're doing math in half the time that I was doing it. But thinking about that entire progression, I think does dovetail with what you're talking about. So I agree with what Rich and Andrea talked about, which is we don't want to overburden the administration with more, but if there are synergies between these different avenues, I think we should pursue them. Please.
When Dr. Zuglionis talks about what makes us us, and I think about the progression, something, in back to school night last night for the middle school, what I also think is so important to preserve, and when we're doing this overview, is the different on-ramps in those course progressions, that there's not just one path to, the highest achievement for a math student, that maybe that math student didn't peak in middle school to find themselves, but they found math as a high achiever in 10th grade. I really think that that's so important, that a kid can find things later that, that they don't have to know in the third grade what they're good at.
Sorry, I just want to say Chris is the architect and the author of the North Shore Journey.
Not true.
Chris, who?
Not true.
All right. Thank you, Carol. So that's a lot of feedback on that. I don't know. I'm not going to ask on the spot, what your thoughts are on this, but it will require us to go for it. And the goal here is to be able to adopt something at our next meeting so we can get going, because one of the discussions we've had in past years was if you don't get the goals going, goals are not something you work on starting in March. Number one, it's budget season. Number two, it takes a whole year to do these things. Cramming is very rarely a good solution. Well, we will. I think we will. Yeah.
I have other things, but I'm
me too.
focusing on this one right now.
Yep.
So, if you could keep the world languages in mind and consider it.
It does seem like if we were going to do a deep dive, that would be one that is due.
That or fine and performing arts. Those are two that we haven't really even, really looked at.
That was the only thing I was going to say. Is I know we were trying to calendar presentations on athletics achievement and also fine and performing arts achievement. So if there was some way we could connect those and then also accomplish what we were starting to look at for FLES in the other part, and then do maybe a full FLES read. That was just one initial thought I had, but I think, to Trustee Galati's point, I think we could accomplish, at least one of those additional.
I'll defer to you, but I'm just asking that you keep it in the back of mind, because there are areas that, and if not for this year, for next year, that we really haven't looked at thoroughly in a very long time. So if you looked at something in 2013, 2014, the data you got at a program in its infancy and the data you're getting now when you have students who went from elementary up into high school in Mandarin, we didn't have that before, right? So I think, it's important to look at something that we implemented at that time, that we've now had this many years of, 9 years of experience.
With regards to the presentation on athletics and fine arts, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and it may or may not dovetail with this, but this is something we talked about, is the idea of student engagement, and those are obviously areas that are engagement magnets. We see what happens to our students who are involved in those things. There was the Tri-States review last year about student engagement, and we had talked a little bit about that, and I wasn't sure, you said at the last meeting typically that was something that is followed up with in some way the following year, so I wasn't sure how you saw that fitting to this overall matrix.
Yeah, I think that is that does fit in well, because we do have a formal follow-up visit in which we have to present how we acted upon their recommendations from the March visit this year. So I think that would tie in nicely to goal 2, to the bullet, the first bullet on because I think that engagement, strategic plan, North Shore Journey kind of all tie together.
I think that's we're going to wait for some feedback on you, and you'll let us know a recommendation. Seems like we put out some good ideas and talk them through. Other thoughts we have on the goals?
Goal 3.
Go for it.
First bullet. I don't know if I'm really comfortable with, we have to conduct an audit of the district's infrastructure for the capital reserve. And obviously, we know that athletic has some big ticket items coming up. And I'm all about meeting their needs. But we also have some needs in other departments. Fine and Performing Arts does not have a dance studio, that is actually a curriculum offering, and we don't have appropriate space for them. So for me, I don't want to say an emphasis on any particular department until we do a survey, right? I mean, there may be, I know we just did the big renovation. Hopefully that met some of the STEAM needs, but I don't know that really, right? I don't. Or what we might need down the road. So I'm not sure that we really should be putting an emphasis on any one particular department until we actually do the audit of the infrastructure needs.
I think Marianne sort of speaks to the larger issue when we're looking at where to spend money. Where does student voice fit into that? And I think it might be good in goal 3 somewhere to say that we're considering student voice because that's why we're here.
It's on goal 3, even the point of the infrastructure.
I understand the point on not specifying a particular department, but I don't think we should minimize the importance and the expense of some of the athletic needs. And I talk about the turf and the track, and I think we haven't bought the new turf and track that we need, and I think we need a cap reserve for the turf and track we need beyond that one. So the 10-year cycle beyond the one that we buy. So I'm not sure that athletics not being mentioned because it's so expensive relative to some pain. And I don't know. I understand your point. But I do think that, again, I'll reiterate that exploring budgetary efficiencies in a way that preserves educational programs, we can't minimize. I don't know why it's the third bullet. But the new revenue sources is very interesting. And I kind of wanted to explore that and understand some of the opportunities and tuition-based programs. Like, what were some of the ideas there that we could develop?
We have talked a lot about special education programs and that we could bring to a larger scale that could benefit both our students and students from other districts. We, and Trustee McCary talked about this at our last meeting about grants and being really more assertive about finding grants. I think, one key piece that I think Mr. Pappas and I would really appreciate is the sustainable and for the whole community, especially in light of LIPA, finding sustainable revenue. So building, whether it's programs, ongoing grants, recurring grants, possible state aid increases, things like that, that we know we can count on from year to year to provide more long-term security. We've talked about smaller revenue sources, professional development programs. We have a very talented faculty and administration who could provide those programs to folks from other districts. Our summer programs, booster club camps, things like that. That I think the other part of this is looking at models of excellence that other districts have. A lot of Nassau County districts and Suffolk County districts who do things like this, and they're a sustainable part of their revenue source.
I just want to respond. It's not just paint that other departments need.
Of course.
And so I don't really think
I'm not interested in getting in a semantic
I know,
debate.
but I don't.
I understand your point.
No, you're
and I
talking
just-
over
Hold on, guys.
me. Could you just let me finish?
We'll make a point and then we'll
Yeah.
go
Just
to
let
the
me
But
finish.
it's not
Just let me
productive to
finish.
have an argument.
Just let me finish. You talked over me.
I apologize.
It is not just paint. Other departments may have bigger needs. And there is a definite need for a safe place for a dance program that is part of the curriculum. And I'm going to tell you from sitting here for 9 years that when you put something out there to the public and you're not inclusive, like a capital reserve that didn't have anything for fine and performing arts, or a bond where the athletic community didn't feel that they got enough, it creates tension in the community. And I'm going to tell you, I have heard people say, I am not voting for that bond because it has nothing for my student in it. I am not voting for that capital reserve because it has nothing for my student in it. Just from a strategic standpoint, when you go into those kinds of specifics, then you're going to alienate half the people who are going out to vote. So from a practical point of view, you need to do an audit before you determine what is going to be a priority. Obviously, we all know the turf field is a priority because it is at the end of its useful life. We know that there have been issues with the track, so that is obviously something we're going to look at. But there may be things where people who don't have a loud voice, who haven't come here, feel is important. That's important for our student engagement. You have a lot of students in the fine and performing arts program. A lot.
Can I just respond briefly?
So I'm not finished. So I think just a little bit of experience that we should think in when we're talking about goals, we should think about when we're doing an audit to do a broad audit. And when you talk about community engagement for the capital reserve, I think Dr. McCarry is right. You have to talk about students as well, their input as well, community input. So that would be my point.
Thank you. And Trustee Cashman, you're up.
All I would like to just clarify is that I think that there are many in the athletics community who would say that they were underserved for quite some time, and to keep their name in a reserve, I think, would help the passage of a particular capital reserve, and that they have been it doesn't discount the needs of any other population, all other needs of all underserved communities. We should, of course, audit, but I'd like to continue to see their name on there. That's it.
I have a comment. I'm not sure if anyone else wanted to weigh in on this before I. So I think I have a way to sort of weave both of those together, which is that I think we're in agreement that a fair audit of what the most pressing needs are, with some kind of ranking of intensity to some degree, or ranking of urgency, would be the result of an audit. And that would naturally result in knowing things like, the turf obviously is up there because I would prefer the term nearing the end of its life, but I think, nearing or at are similar. But I think that would be the question of whether we want to include athletics in there. I understand the point, and I think we're all aware of the larger dynamic as well. I wonder if there's a way to mesh the first two lines of goal 3, conduct an audit of district infrastructure, with an emphasis on, and I'm not going to weigh in on whether we should have athletics not in there, but sorry, Chris, with an emphasis on athletics or on most pressing needs, to develop a long-range financial plan to address these needs, including the potential development of a capital reserve with broad community input. And by community input, that very much should include student voice. Yeah. No doubt about that.
We're forgetting too, they're just major safety issues too that need to be taken care of, right? So, the emphasis probably should be on what's a priority. A priority is safety, number one, right? And then, we all saw that list of possible projects that we need to address.
And if I'm going to bring up the
I wasn't going to name specific things.
I'm not going to, but I'm going to remember, Trustee Jones, who was on this board for many times, love talking about septic. Like there's a lot of things that aren't fun to talk about necessarily, but they are certainly needed, and they're certainly part of what this conversation has to be about.
How about putting in something, because I just think that we have to look at this holistically. You just can't look at one, and we do know that athletics has some very pressing needs, right? But we do also know that fine and performing arts and infrastructure. So why don't we conduct an audit of the district infrastructure needs with a goal of prioritizing capital projects, right? Or something along those lines that we could prioritize and prioritize and long-term planning. They're one and the same altogether. And, you know, we know that there are certain things that are more pressing than others. A turf field right now is more pressing than the track, right? I would think not having a place for a program, a traumatic issue may be pressing. It may not be as costly, which may bump it up that you could put it in the budget rather than at capital reserve. So I'm not sure I really want to mesh 1 and 2, because I think that we have to think about what projects we could fit in the budget. What projects are more appropriate for a capital reserve, right? And that's part of that is going to be need, and part of that's going to be dollar amount. So it would be easier. We do have that capital projects line in the budget. So something that just requires minimal work, or we could get state aid for, and we have to look at that as well. If you're changing a classroom into a dance studio, or you're building a classroom, there's state aid that's available that would not be available for a turf field. So I mean, it's a very complicated. It's a very complicated list. It's a very complicated goal. So I think we need to be looking. We need, just like you were talking about the curriculum, K through 12 for efficiencies, I think you really have to be looking at the infrastructure as a whole. And that was my only point, not to do any disservice to any particular community, but I think you have to look at the infrastructure needs as a whole. We need to prioritize those needs in terms of time, and then we need to figure out where those needs fit in terms of financial planning. And some of them will go in the budget, and some of them will go into capital reserve.
I think if I can piggyback off of that, I think tell me if you agree with this. I think what you're saying to some degree is that if we have a good process of identifying it, the answers will naturally present themselves to us through building condition surveys, through understanding what our needs are, through understanding useful lifespans of our current facilities, etc.
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
There's no septic tank advocates, right?
Well, there will be if it fails. So, okay.
Just on that,
John.
goal 3, the bullet number 4, I would say just add in the phrase, you have short-term and long-term non-tax revenue, right? Because that's what we want to emphasize. We're looking for money that doesn't come from the taxpayer. And, trying to get revenue that generates, or trying to put out money that's going to bring in more money really should be part of our goal too, right? So if we're looking at our infrastructure needs, we're looking at, where we're spending money, thinking long-term about how we can spend that money to bring in more revenue is also really important.
And you know who would be helpful on this as well is Tina, our architect, because she was the one who put in my head that we may be able to get state aid on if we converted a classroom to a different use. So I think we really need, and part of this Genesis, as we all know, is going to be in construction steering, right? That's going to be what we're going to talk about probably forever on September 22nd, so don't make any plans. I'm blocking that day out. So I think we really need some sort of expertise on that, on where we can see that we can get state aid, because that will also make some determination as to what we do and what we don't do, and when we do it. And I wouldn't forget any of our parent organizations, the Arts Angels, the Athletic Booster Clubs, who have always been so phenomenal in supporting us and filling in those gaps where we need it. And then if something is important enough, we can figure out a way to, raise money through events. I mean, I think back to the years with Leslie Scaglione, God bless her. She won a new playground. We were the only school in Glen Head that didn't get a new playground. Everyone else got a new playground in the bond. And we got a new playground and an outdoor auditorium. Then she decided she was going to do an outdoor classroom in the middle school, and she figured out how to do it. I mean, we have a lot of talent in this district, and there's a lot of ways to supplement. And if something is important enough to these organizations and beneficial, I have every confidence that our parent community will step up.
A couple other, thank you. I had a couple other thoughts on goal 3. They're kind of smaller, but as long as we seem to be honing in on this. Goal 3, bullet 3, which currently reads, explore budgetary efficiencies in a way that preserves the educational program of North Shore, but also addresses financial needs. I was somewhat struck by the fact that the words LIPA settlement appear nowhere on this page. I think we have to acknowledge that in our goals. That is the driving force of these efforts. So I thought that we could maybe end with, instead of addresses financial needs, addresses the specific challenges resulting from the LIPA settlement. I think that.
Is that in line with our settlement? Is that not pejorative?
The challenges are that we are clearly factually losing revenue. I think that's.
Could you
what we talked
repeat
about. Of course.
the words you said
I think I have
before?
a better one.
Okay, I'm sure, but I wanted to get the ball rolling.
I'm sorry.
That's right. Right now it ends with explore budgetary efficiency in a way that preserves the educational programs of North Shore, but also addresses financial needs. That's currently. I thought as my initial suggestion would be that also addresses the specific challenges resulting from the LIPA settlement.
But the revenue shortfalls created.
I was going to say explore budgetary efficiencies to mitigate the impact of LIPA so that we preserve the educational program of North Shore.
You could say the tax certiorari or settlement, the Nassau County settlement. I mean, I don't know how you want to do it, but you could. It also addresses the financial needs and revenue shortfalls created by recent developments.
I thought it was important that in this year, when this is all what we've been talking about, what the community is going to be talking about, what they're going to continue to be talking about as we do experience a tax shift that our taxpayers are going to feel, I think it's important that we put this in here, that we acknowledge it explicitly, that this is a result of something that is happening that we have been talking about quite a bit from this.
Also address financial needs and the shifting tax burden. How about that? Then you don't have to name anyone.
I do want to name it. I don't think it's the resolution of the ongoing LIPA situation. I mean, we can certainly run it by the attorneys, so we have no problem. But I think it's why have it be the elephant in the room? Why not put a big sign that says elephant? It's not pejorative.
I'm just going to add one thing in the settlement agreement, which is public, from the July 1st meeting. It does say it doesn't preclude us from advocating for additional aid or, additional revenue. So I think there's an avenue there as well.
So that was one. The second question I had was I didn't see any specific mention of explicit attempts to underspend this budget. I don't think it needs to be explicitly stated in one of our goals, but I did want to make sure that it still is going to be a priority. And so I thought maybe if it's not going to be named in a goal, which is fine, that we do put it in part of the November 10th scheduled discussion of budget priorities and revenue challenges. So we can have a bit of an awareness at that point. November 10th seems like well enough into the year to be able to identify areas of potential savings within current year budget. Other thoughts on, I'll say financial goal 3, but obviously it could be opened up to anything if folks want to go further. Any other comments? I did have a couple others myself, but
My only, going to goal 1, which is about community outreach with a focus on community engagement. I agree. I am not, nothing about the semantics of how anything is being stated here. I'm more concerned, I guess, about the hows. I guess none of these really talk about. Goal 2 is sort of more explicit about what we're going to review and analysis, and it feels more verbs in our sentences, whereas goal 1, it feels very much a repeat of last year, and I'm not sure the needle is moving and that people feel like, I don't know. I don't know. I would love some more explicit understanding of what we're going to do differently in 2002, 2003 in our community outreach with, and how we're going to engage. And I know that there's coffee talks and there's coffee with Chris and all that, but
I think that's a little bit different than what he's saying in goal 1. So if you look at bullet 1, he's really, and I think the language in the first bullet needs to be simplified. But I think your goal is to basically create a system and a process for committees.
board subcommittees.
Board subcommittees, correct.
Or, I mean, there's 1,000 committees, but I think we're talking about board subcommittees here. I'm sorry, I'm asking Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could extend that to other committees too, because we've had since the strategic plan. But I guess in terms of being a board goal, correct? Yeah, that's the kind of germane to board committees.
it's probably more applicable what I was saying to the second bullet point, and I see why you clarified that. I think it's more, I just wanted to speak to the more overall idea of community engagement in my comments.
I agree that we moving the needle is will be the result of that goal. So I'm not sure the how, but luckily we all get to go home, go back to our regular jobs all week, and the team here has to figure it out. But this sets the goalpost.
That too, and reflecting on this more specificity about how it moves us forward, helps us grow in this respect, and maybe especially because it was a goal last year. To your point, what are we differentiating this year in terms of specific tasks, if that's accurate?
With regard to the first bullet point, I just wanted to say it ends with enhancing meaningful community involvement and collaboration. I'd like to add a third point, which is continued transparency. We've added, community members to almost all of our committees. We had great response to our applications for community committees this year, and I think we need to highlight that transparency and put it in there. I also felt, well, I'll get to that in a second. Lisa? Yeah.
I guess that there's another terminology, and clear communication is certainly here, but I would love to see the term simplified communication potentially, like, because some of these concepts, particularly with respect to the liposettlement and the financial structure of this tax, shift, is so complicated. So if we could prioritize the simplification and brevity, I think that would go far.
Thank you. I was going to go back to goal 2, bullet 2. The very end of goal 2, bullet 2 says to develop a robust academic program that supports engagement and achievement. I don't think we need to develop that. I think we have a pretty good academic program that supports engagement and achievement. But there were a couple words, and fine, Carol, I won't attribute them to you, even though they were also in your backup. But you talked about meaningful and authentic learning. Chris had talked about focus and depth, engagement and achievement. I think, what I came up with to ensure a robust, meaningful, and authentic academic program with focus and depth that supports engagement and achievement.
You could just simply to enhance, and take out the A, to enhance robust academic programs, to enhance robust academic or existing robust, I don't know. You could just, I think enhance would be a better word
I
than
think
develop.
develop means, sounds like we're starting from scratch. Enhance or grow is better. Expand upon. Yeah, expand upon.
Dick too, though. I think including both words.
Yeah, I think robust could also be used by a community that prioritized test prep, for example. And I think that we may want to think about, authentic learning as something that we are rightfully committed to as the best way to learn, grow, and for the record, do well on tests. And so I think that's important to talk a little bit about who we are rather than just, the robustness of it. And I'll leave it up to you if you want, focus and depth to be. Those are words I know you have keyed in on. You certainly talked about that at superintendent's conference day and in opening letters. I thought that was important too. Any other? I guess I had one more thought, which was touched on earlier, which is I'm not sure the ordering of these is the right order. Does anyone else feel like maybe? I mean, they're all important, but for the very first one to be, fixing tightening up the structure of our board subcommittees, that's certainly important. But I'm not sure that should be the very first one.
That's my first point.
Yeah, exactly. I'm bringing it full circle.
Yeah.
So I thought either 2-3-1 or 3-2-1.
I always think about when we did board training, we were told our number one goal is to oversee the educational program, and the number two was the fiscal aspect of it.
I thought that made sense. So critical analysis of instructional program is 1, strategic budget and financial planning is 2, and then community outreach with a focus on community engagement is 3, which is not, for those, I don't have 3 children, but for those who do have 3 children, there's no one's your favorite, but you got to put them in order somehow.
As a psychologist, I can always tell who somebody's favorite is. In goal 1, could we just get rid of that comma after community outreach?
Former number 1.
Yeah, right, correct.
And that's all I have. Any other comments before we move on? Okay. Thank you, trustees. Discussion topic number 2 is LAC goals for the year. And unfortunately, Trustee Mosca, who is our dedicated liaison to LAC, which is the Legislative Action Committee, was not able to make it tonight. But I think I'm going to turn it over to Chris, if you don't mind, and I'll let you kind of lead this part with my thanks.
Sure. Yeah, so we're missing Trustee Mosca, but we hope that she's watching and feeling well. So we had a great initial LAC planning meeting earlier. And we started to talk about several goals. We talked about obviously advocating, like we were talking about in the board goals, for increased support from New York State, specifically bullet aid and more generous state aid formulas to help us with sustainable revenue from year to year. We did discuss the exploration of action to help clean up the LIPA site for an eventual return to taxable status, and how we could create a situation where new tax-paying revenue could come on to those properties as well. We in the past have had legislative breakfasts through LAC, and that's again, I think, something we would want to, LAC might want to explore, perhaps not other districts, but really to work with after elections and after who is actually representing us is settled, to have an event that is specific to North Shore, especially because of our unique situation with the LIPA settlement with Nassau County. We've also, LAC has also thought about a community legislative night in February. It was a great success in this past year as well. There is also the very specific issue that we're dealing with, the Engineers Country Club property and the development, and how that will impact our enrollment traffic, and what's going on with the IDA and the county and the tax breaks that are a part of that deal. We are going to try, I'm saying LAC as a member now of LAC. LAC would like to also, I think, look at the application process and actually try and get new membership going at the end of the school year, the very early summer, so that they can get working earlier on, not wait for the school year to start.
Well, you're her, I forget whether you're Cyrano or she's Cyrano, but thank you for speaking for her. Are there other thoughts that trustees had that were priorities? Lisa Colasioba?
One, but I know we had talked about having a presence at the back to school nights, even at the PTA meetings at the different schools. I think that's something that was done pre-COVID, and then we didn't have in-person meetings and it stopped. But, I think just educating, again, this goes with our goal of educating the community. Having a representative from LAC at those meetings, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, we did talk about that, and I guess we're a little late because some of them are already happening. But I don't think there's any reason just to limit them to back to school night, right? LAC is an ongoing thing, and you never know who in the community has some connections or information or expertise. You could have LAC people at other events, let's say a concert, or you could have them back at homecoming, right? And sitting at events where you know that you're going to get a high traffic volume. And it's not just to have people on LAC, it's to have people engage in the process. So really our number one goal really is going to be getting revenue, right? That's really that's really what we want. We want some money, right? So we got to figure out sources of money, and that also means places where we're losing money, which are those IDAs, like engineers. And those things slip by. They send you a notice on a postcard that is lost in your magazine or advertisement. So that is something we really need to keep an eye on. That engineers and what kind of tax breaks they're getting, and anywhere else they may be getting tax breaks in the district that we're not aware of. I would think that would be one of the big things that LAC should be tracking. And then once, if we know that, then we need to get the community engaged to show up at those hearings, at those meetings, at the town of Oyster Bay meetings, at the town of Hempstead or Roslyn Harbor, wherever, Village of Roslyn Harbor, wherever this is occurring, that they're approving these things and the IDAs, that there's a presence that is going to be very vocal when it comes time for them to be reelected if they are not bearing their fair share of the tax burden. And you're not going to tell me that is going to be, it's not 55 and over housing in there. It's not. And they're 3 and 4 bedroom condos, and I don't know, maybe they're single family homes. You're not buying those kind of spaces if you don't have children that are going to be enrolled in school. So if it was really emphasized on people who didn't have children, they would be developing it differently, or whose children are educated.
Trustee McCarry?
So I completely agree. We definitely have to prioritize like monitoring these IDAs. There was recently a bill that passed in the Assembly and in the Senate to notify school districts that they're going to be affected by these types of programs. Hochul hasn't signed it yet. There are other bills that are pending that have to do with IDAs in the state, including developing like one giant IDA for the state instead of these separate ones. So I think it would be really good if LAC was involved in that. We all know what happens with Amazon and Syosset. It was reported in Newsday, right? The school district fought the pilot, and then Nassau County clawed back the money because Amazon didn't do what they said they were going to do. So I think that's very, very important. Again, I think the focus needs to be to reiterate getting these this rescue money from New York State. So advocating, brought it up a bunch of times, combined wealth ratio formula, looking at when there's a giant event that happens in a community, how does the state respond to that to protect the taxpayers? I think we should also look at, and we spoke about this last meeting a little bit, and I did a little investigation, looking at how can we improve the traffic light at the high school and the middle school. There is grant money there that's put aside from the state for transportation projects. So if we were able to access some of that money to improve traffic flow, right, to improve the quality of air because cars are not idling there. Also, if we had better traffic flow, the students, there would be less delay when you're at that light, right, waiting for kids to pass. So there might be ways that LAC could investigate that for us. And I also think LAC historically has really looked at local issues, but there's so much pending legislation that affects education in the state, from things like there's currently something for mandated dyslexia screening from K to second, to kind of quirky things like school districts must provide a second kind of flavored milk. I think we haven't really gotten involved in advocating for things that can affect students across the state, and I think it might be helpful if LAC can keep an eye on some of that.
So I just want to reiterate how important I think it is that we move to a spring application process for LAC. It really does. It's so important for the budgetary process in Albany. By the time we get them on board in the fall, the process, and they're already on board with and then they're oriented. They've had a couple meetings. They want to do something with legislators, and they're already in Albany, and they're already working on the budget, and it's almost impossible to get them engaged. So, and then maybe we need to also be looking at the terms, because some of the things that Andrews were talking about, somebody who's a 1-year term LAC member, there's a learning curve with all this stuff from a community member. So I think that, I'm not sure everybody would love to be on LAC for many years, but maybe they would.
Our bylaws have 1, 2, and 3-year terms. So it depends on how you're sort of appointed, I think, right?
The bylaws have 3-year terms. What happens is when people leave early, they step down, or they get elected to the board, or they move, then you fill in the term. So everyone's on a rotating 3-year basis. I believe this year we have 3 openings on LAC, and we are hopefully going to fill them to the terms that will get us back in a 3-year cycle.
And I do think it's a great idea to get them involved in all the community events around, getting tables. And I would also love to see, I know that this is a little bit tiny bit of a segue, but the community budget forum members to share a table at the same places and footprint, because to get the information about what's going on with the budget and sharing any kind of information about that, and engagement with the community about question answering and getting everybody involved in that way, it could be great synergy to kill 2 birds with 1 stone in that way.
Also, Trustee Visser reminded me about the state utility fund.
I was going to bring up,
Yeah, and we don't qualify now, but I think there is some legislation that is pending that may change that would allow us to qualify. So that would be something that LAC should be monitoring as well.
I was going to bring that up. There's a mitigation fund at the state level for power authority decommissioning. Unfortunately, the way that the bills were written and the dates that are in there, we don't qualify. So I think specifically we need to really have our representatives in Albany, in the Assembly and in the Senate, push for new legislation so we can be part of that fund, because there's a lot of money there, and we certainly deserve, based upon what it was designed for, we deserve a piece of it.
Very much. And it segues into, I guess, a lot of these have been mentioned, but I'll mention them again to put an extra tick next to them on your list. You need a new pen, Chris. Support the board efforts to lobby for state aid reformulation, grant and legislative aid directly, and in coordination with our lobbyist DHC, and also through grassroots community support as needed. I think they can support the district goal about community engagement by focusing on their role as liaison between the community and the Board of Ed to help spread information proactively, and also through the other avenues we talked about, appearance at events, all school events, etc. Keep working on the IDAs. We had one member of LAC who served 3 years and did a very fine job and really focused on that area and was sort of a one-man band with that. And he's retreating back to private life. I don't want to lose that emphasis that he brought, because it was very good work that he did. And I think that regarding engineers and other areas, I think that it would kill a lot of birds with one stone if we can have LAC working with our civics to deal with some of these issues. The discussions of traffic, the endless fight for a sidewalk to either the Four Corners or the deli, whatever they're calling it now, the Chop Deli, I think it still says on the awning. But I know that's something that the civics have been actively working on. George Pombar has been working on that, and I know that can be a real combined effort between the civics and the school to accomplish something that works well for our students, especially in bad conditions, but also, students don't always necessarily want to walk to the other side of the street, even if it's safer. So we can maybe help them prevent some dangerous situations. I know the civics are invested in that. So I think those are areas that can be LAC priorities. Other LAC priorities before we
didn't talk about brownfield cleanup. The idea that there is money available and there are organizations in New York State that help clean up this contaminated land so that you can get it back on the tax roll.
This is private property. So I understand the point and I don't disagree. I mean, some of it, there are other areas that are public, but the big area is LIPA, and that's, National Grid owns that property and you can't force them to remediate. The only way it gets remediated, and they're not going to give up that property because the lines go right through there. They have transmission lines, so from the power grid, so they're not giving up that property, and you can't force them to remediate.
would be, I love that idea. That's literally why I went to my first meeting, as I've said before. But I think that is probably something bigger than the school, and might also not be our best avenue in terms of getting in the crosshairs of LIPA. There are other areas that can have that in the community. That's not the only dirty area.
That's right. And, there could be where we advocate for legislation that brownfields that are close to schools get prioritized. Just felt like we, to have something related to the environment is important.
I agree. I think what Lisa Cashman said was hugely important, getting people appointed before the summer so they can hit the ground running. That said, it is our goal to appoint, sorry, I got a little close to the mic there, to appoint members to the committee at our next meeting 2 weeks from today. So we have our work cut out for ourselves, but I believe we can do it. And I know Trustee Mosca is up to the task. So if there's no other comments on Legislative Action Committee directives, I will move on. Chris, you got all that? Okay.
And sometimes the videotape, you do a little Warner Wolf. We go to the videotape.
The videotape. I will now move on to comments from the public. We'll invite anyone from the public who would like to share their thoughts to just come up, state your name and town of residence, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Mandatory, but you're all invited. That said, I don't see anyone getting up, so I am going to move on to public comment closed. Action item 7, which is personnel appointments. We have many personnel appointments and changes tonight, but it is certainly not lost on, and they're all important. They all keep our schools running. They're all very functional and necessary and pivotal to the lives of our students. But yeah, there's one that maybe some people are here for. So I thought I would let Chris say a few words, if you would, Dr. Zublionis.
Thank you so much. This is a very special night for Seacliff School. And I want to thank our Seacliff School faculty, educators for being here tonight, for Ms. Megan McCormick, who will we are recommending be appointed by the board as the interim principal of Seacliff School. Ms. McCormick has worked as a teacher in the North Shore schools for 10 years. As a certified teacher with certifications in educational leadership and technology. She's an instructional leader who's filled administrative vacancies in the past, has participated on several district committees. As many know, she's Coach McCormick, our varsity women's lacrosse coach, and she's just most importantly impacted so many lives of so many students and colleagues. She's a visionary who's led professional development for teachers on educational technology, interdisciplinary learning, outdoor learning, and really served the district so well during the time of the pandemic and online learning, and somehow balanced online learning, which so many of us cringed at, but kept it really healthy and intellectual, and really created great opportunities for our elementary remote students in particular. She is known by everyone at Seacliff School and knows every student at Seacliff School. She has an innate ability to build positive relationships with parents and students. And she has worked to support Seacliff School in so many capacities. I think there's so much that the community might not know that these educators here know about Ms. McCormick and everything she's done for the school and the students and the district. And she is a native of the North Shore schools as well. So we're really excited. We are so thankful for the work that Ms. Wojcik has done over the past 3 years, some of the hardest 3 years of our district, and really in leading Seacliff School and helping the district get through difficult times and putting some amazing structures and policies into place. And we will miss Ms. Wojcik, who's taking a district-wide position in another neighboring district. But we are very excited that this opportunity has worked out in this way, and we recommend that Ms. Megan McCormick be appointed as the interim principal of Seacliff School.
Thank you, Dr. Z. I will procedurally just ask for a motion to, to open discussion on this. Is there a motion on this, on the various personnel items? Thank you, and I heard a second as well. I'm not going to add much to what Chris has to say, but I will just say that Megan and I first met, I think, when we were on the guidance review committee, and I didn't know who anyone was. That was my first committee work, and you're an observer. You understand when to listen, when to contribute. You have so much to contribute, and I've certainly gotten to know you pretty well, and I look forward to getting to know you better. But I'll speak on behalf of the board, even though we haven't quite voted yet, to say we're all really excited for your appointment, and we're excited for the kids of Seacliff and the whole district, and of course your peers that are here to support you, which is always really nice to see. So, are there any other questions or comments on this or other personnel items tonight? All right, I will then call the vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations. And now equally exciting, the acceptance of our claims audit for the month of July. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
It's actually pretty interesting. Are there any questions or comments?
Only one exception.
Yeah.
Out of 358.
I also, I think Denise is using a new font. Anyone else notice that? But it was nice with the same results. Really, really great work by our business office. So with that, I will call the vote. All in favor of its acceptance? Aye. Thank you. Action item 9, which is disposal of inventory. Is there a motion? And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Comments, questions? All in favor? Aye. Action 10, Special Education Consultant Agreement between North Shore and Vicky Klein, PhD. Is there a motion? Second?
Second.
Comments? All in favor? Aye. Action item 11, which is a Special Education Tuition Agreement between North Shore and Locust Valley. Is there a motion? Thank you. A second?
Yeah.
Questions, comments? All in favor? Aye. Action 12, A and B, which are approval of 2 special education services contracts. Is there a motion? Thank you. Second. I heard a second down there. Comments, questions? All in favor? Aye. And finally, Action 13, which are special education services, IEPs. Is there a motion? Thank you. In a second. Comments, discussion?
I would just say that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I meant to ask you beforehand, the district has moved to putting all the IEPs electronic and digital, correct? Yeah, and that teachers have to acknowledge them by September 30th. So if your child has an IEP, know that there's a formal process for teachers who are working with them to know what their accommodations are.
Thank you. With that, I will call the vote. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Old business.
I got it. I have some. All right. So I know that we put an RFP out for the pre-K program because we had that money that came to us. Would you be able to update us on where we're at with that?
So for just a quick background, for the first time, the North Shore Central School District received state aid specifically for the use of establishing a universal pre-K in the amount of about $523,000, which gives us 97 seats at the mandated rate of $5,400. The reason we know these numbers so well is because we have really struggled to find a participating provider that would accept that tuition. It seems like a fair tuition at a statewide average, but downstate on Long Island, and especially in Nassau County, the going rate on tuition for a 4-year-old pre-K full day is about $8,000 to $10,000, if not more. So we did not get any responses to the RFP, unfortunately. Immediately, Mr. Pappas and I spoke to the state representatives at the Office of Early Learning, and they confirmed what Dr. Dolan had said last year, which is that we could start using those funds after September 1st. So we're going to put out another RFP, and this is repeat information too, but we can go down 2 roads. We can continue to explore if we have the space to work with a participating provider like Scope or another. Who could come and do the program in our schools. In fact, I know there was a recent article in Newsday
That's what I was going to ask you about.
UPKs.
Yeah.
A lot of those districts, Jericho, for example, are using Scope in their own buildings. Really hard for us to do this September because of all the construction. The winter could, and that's at the board's discretion, the winter could be a better time because our elementary libraries will be completed. And then we want to possibly explore that. The benefit of that is it's happening in the North Shore schools, and so for somebody to leave their preschool and be here, kind of get an early start in the schools, that's attractive. But that being said, we will now go further out and a little further away from the North Shore schools and look for preschools that are participating. Just to use neighboring districts as an example. I'll use Syos as an example. They tend to establish partnerships with parochial pre-Ks because their tuition is lower from the get-go than a pure private.
I read that article in Newsday, and and it could be inaccurate, but some of the school districts that developed these programs were also getting federal money, not just state money.
Right. And we don't qualify for federal money right now. We'll continue to explore that. I know there are other grants that come up that are competitive grants. Those grants tend to be based on need. I will provide the board with more backup on, why that is. But we'll continue to explore those.
And like you said, the reality is we're going in this direction anyway.
And I know there's concern about what that would mean for our budget. This is totally independent from our budget. I have answered a few emails on that over the summer, and it would be predicated upon receiving these funds. It's, I think, a good distinction with what we're talking about is passive and active. So we have the passive grant money that we've gotten for the first time this year, and then actively we can proactively go out and look for more UPK funds.
I know it's universal pre-K, but could we do it in a way that it it sort of, if we're doing it in our schools in January, where we had that Ready, Set, Go program that we did over the summer, it can't have any additional. It has to be
We're very
available, very strict, very available to everyone. That's what I thought. I was just hoping, because I'm thinking
Yeah.
no one's switching their kid in January.
That's what I was actually going to ask. Do you think you would get any people applying for January, or are they already set? Do they pay for? I forget already, because do you pay for the whole year when you put your kid in preschool?
It does depend on the preschool. I know, there are some that are half year. I have gotten some questions from parents about, will it be ready for half year, because we would like to make the switch. I do think having it in house would make it more attractive, because now it's kind of like that concept. If it's not the Ready, Set, Go, but it is that transition in. But yeah, I think we will probably have fewer entrants into the lottery. And that, we would still have to process that once we know we have providers.
It's just like this free money
Yeah.
that I don't want to leave on the table, especially because it helps young parents, because the cost of pre-K is not cheap.
When we the question on that, I did ask Scope that question, and they mentioned, they said last year we started Hop Hog in November. We started, I think Sias had said they started theirs in October. So there are these off year starts, and people they can prorate their tuition to the preschools. So
Thank you.
Can I ask another question on that? So if we did it in school, I'm just thinking, because I was a working parent when my children were in pre-K, and that made life very difficult. If we were able to do it in the schools, would they be able to utilize our before and after school program?
Not because of the age range.
I would have to look into that. It wouldn't be
Because that
covered.
would be very attractive for people if we could if they could put their child in and do before and after school, because there are very few preschool providers that will keep your children short of daycare all day.
That's what a lot of the preschools do. So as well, to your point, I think that concept, I think we could explore that. I think if it doesn't involve transportation, doesn't include transportation. We know that they might have to pay out of pocket for that. It's not covered by the grant, but
They would pay for that rather than, it's a
we
lot
could
cheaper.
probably look with the organization North Shore Before and After Care to see. I don't see why not. They couldn't do that. I don't see what the obstacle to that would be, and perhaps other things that could make it more attractive.
And if they're in preschool, they should be trained. Most preschools require kids to be trained. If you're not, you're talking 4-year-olds.
That'll be our question for them. Like, how young can you go to help us?
But that would be something to look at, because it would be very attractive for parents to be able to put their children here and have the extended day.
All right, so let's get some answers. I think that's a great question. Other old business that trustees may have.
I have another one. I'm not sure if it's old or new, but we did talk about the meeting topics last meeting, and over the last 2 weeks, I feel like we really left something out. It's been a year since the DASA report, and I'd really like to have a presentation on what systems do we have in place a year later. Do we have any new data that demonstrates that we made some kind of progress? I think it's important to demonstrate to the community that we haven't forgotten about this. And I don't know, I feel it's very important.
I think that's good in terms of a process question. I think that's great to bring up. And I think, Chris, you'll let us all know what you think about that.
Yeah, when we're reviewing the goals, we'll also look at the meeting topics, see if there's any changes that are necessitated by the goals edits, and then we'll work that in as well.
Thank you, Andrea and Chris. Other old business?
I understand that the sign came up at the last meeting, and is there consensus? Are we ready to move forward? Can we put this to bed already?
I was actually going to bring that up if I was allowed at old business, just because we had a question about, do we act on it? Like, is there like a vote on it? And We did a little research, and because of the cost, even though the provider we were looking at is a sole source, we spoke with counsel, and we do have to do an RFP. It's likely that it could come out that that is the provider that we use, who, you know, the sole source. So the action would be to accept that vendor, correct, Mr. Pappas?
That would be correct. We looked into it. The single side sign was just below the threshold for going out for an RFP. The double sided sign brings us just over the threshold.
Of course.
Yes. And while they are a sole provider of the sign that we're interested in, which is the same sign that you see at most school districts, I think looking at their clients, that's the same sign most are. It's not necessarily the only sign in the world that could fit that. So the state would say you would have to go out and get an RFP for the sign. So that's what we're now looking into.
You have to advertise the RFP, or can we just send it out?
We would have to our normal process. So I think we would have to
Advertise,
it in
yeah,
our
just
local
thinking about
Papers of
additional
record,
costs.
right? The local papers the official papers, but.
You're saying that the action that the board would take is not to authorize because it's in the budget, we previously had approved it, it would be the award of the RFP at the time.
Exactly. You already authorized the putting up of the sign and the financing for the sign previously. So this would just be once the vendor is determined, and hopefully it may be the same vendor, authorizing the vendor to put the sign up.
So I understand this, so the public understands this. For an RFP to be valid, need you have more than one respondent?
No.
Okay, great.
They were, when we were looking for quotes, the only one who really responded to it. So.
Okay. That's the status. Other old into new business? New business? It's actually, I have one thing that's almost exactly in the same vein. Jamie, you had talked in your report about a emergency repair to the high school roof, and I just wanted to confirm that does not require an RFP.
It does not. And the vendor that is being selected is off of a BOCES bid. So,
Okay.
So we do not have to do an RFP for that repair.
Thank you. Other new business? All right, folks, I will then ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
And a second? All in favor of calling it a night? Thank you.
Woo-hoo.
Take care.
Get the second part of the US
Great.
Open. Amazing. Ladies.